At its peak, Spain claimed dominion over more than 5 million square miles, a staggering fifth of the world's landmass. From the deserts of California to the jungles of the Philippines, from the icy winds of Patagonia to the warm harbors of Manila, a single crown ruled it all. But today, Spain fits snugly within the Iberian Peninsula, its empire reduced to museums, memories, and broken stone. How did an obscure kingdom at the edge of Europe rise to become the world's first global superpower, and why, after just 4 centuries, did it all unravel? This is not merely a tale of conquest. It's a story of ambition, blood, gold, betrayal, and the invisible forces that erode even the mightiest of empires from within. In the year 1469, Spain didn't yet exist, at least, not as we know it. The Iberian Peninsula was fractured into competing Christian kingdoms, most notably Castile and Aragon. For 7 centuries, they had fought a bitter campaign known as the Reconquista, clawing back lands taken by the Moors, Islamic invaders from North Africa who had once ruled nearly the entire peninsula. But that same year, a marriage changed everything. Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon joined their realms not just in matrimony, but in purpose. Together, they would forge the foundations of a united Spain. In 1492, they completed the Reconquista by capturing Granada, the last Muslim stronghold in Iberia. Yet, while their armies rested, their eyes turned outward. The age of exploration had begun. Portugal was already probing the African coast, seeking a sea route to the lucrative spice markets of the East Indies, bypassing the middlemen of Venice and the Ottoman Empire. Spain needed its own path to fortune. And just then, a Genoese navigator came knocking on their door. His name was Cristoforo Colombo, better known as Christopher Columbus. He believed that Asia could be reached not by sailing south and around Africa, but by heading west across the Atlantic. Portugal had rejected his proposal. Spain, desperate for its own overseas breakthrough, took a gamble. On the 3rd of August, 1492, Columbus set sail with 3 ships, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. 10 weeks later, he landed not in Asia, but on an island in the Bahamas, a place he would name San Salvador. Believing he had reached the East Indies, he called the locals Indians. He had, in fact, stumbled upon a new world, though he died in 1506, never realizing the scale of what he had found. But the Spanish crown understood. Within months, a second voyage was launched, then a third, then a fourth. Islands were charted, settlements were founded, and a vast untouched continent, rich in gold, silver, and civilizations opened before them. But Spain was not alone. Portugal, fearing Spanish dominance of these new lands, appealed to the Pope. In 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas was signed. The world outside Europe was divided along a meridian, west to Spain, east to Portugal. At the time, it seemed to grant the entire New World to Spain, although a strange twist of geography would place Brazil within Portugal's share. By 1496, Bartholomew Columbus had founded Santo Domingo, the first permanent European city in the Americas. Cuba fell in 1515, and by 1513 Vasco Núñez de Balboa had crossed Panama and glimpsed the Pacific, setting the stage for global empire. Yet Spain had barely begun to understand what lay ahead. In 1519, Hernán Cortés, a minor nobleman turned adventurer, sailed from Cuba with fewer than 600 men. His goal, to find the fabled empire rumored to lie west of the Yucatan. He found it. Tenochtitlan, capital of the Aztecs, rose from the center of a vast lake like a mirage. Grand causeways stretched over water. Temples scraped the skies. Tens of thousands lived under the rule of Montezuma II, a divine king, both feared and revered. At first, the Aztecs mistook the Spaniards for gods. That illusion quickly shattered. Cortés seized Montezuma and turned the city into a powder keg. In June 1520, tensions exploded. Montezuma died either by Spanish hands or angry Aztecs, and the Spanish were forced to flee in the night. They called it La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows, but they would return. In 1521, Cortés laid siege to Tenochtitlan, With the help of indigenous allies, longtime enemies of the Aztecs, he conquered the city, razed it to the ground, and built Mexico City upon its ruins. The Aztec Empire was no more. In its place rose the viceroyalty of New Spain, the first jewel in the Spanish crown. While the Aztecs crumbled in the north, another great civilization loomed thousands of miles to the south, hidden among the jagged peaks of the Andes. The Inca Empire, at its zenith, controlled a vast stretch of South America, from modern-day Colombia to central Chile. With stone cities carved into mountainsides, intricate road systems, and a central bureaucracy rivaling any in Europe, the Incas were both technologically advanced and highly organized. In 1532, the Spanish arrived. Francisco Pizarro, a distant relative of Cortés and a hardened veteran of conquest, entered Inca lands with fewer than 200 men. But fate handed him an unexpected advantage: disease. Years before Pizarro's landing, smallpox, carried unknowingly by earlier Spanish expeditions, had swept through the Andes, killing millions. Among the dead was the Incan emperor Huayna Capac, whose sudden death sparked a bloody civil war between his sons. Pizarro arrived as the victor. Atahualpa was consolidating power. At the town of Cajamarca, Pizarro invited Atahualpa to a meeting. The Incan emperor arrived unarmed, surrounded by his nobles. The Spanish ambushed him. Within hours, the Inca king was a captive. Despite paying a ransom of gold and silver that filled an entire room, Atahualpa was executed. It was the beginning of the end. Over the next decade, Spain's ironclad grip tightened. Lima was founded in 1535. By 1542, the Viceroyalty of Peru was established. Resistance continued into the 1570s, but the Highland Empire was no match for European steel, disease, and betrayal. With Mexico and Peru under their control, Spain now held the twin pillars of American civilization. What followed was a flood of unimaginable wealth. Silver from Potosi in Bolivia, gold from Zacatecas in Mexico. Spain's colonial mines produced a staggering 80% of the world's silver by the late 16th century. The Spanish built an elaborate treasure fleet system to carry these riches home, escorted by war galleons, timed with the seasons and departing annually from ports like Cartagena, Veracruz, and Havana. Each year, the treasure fleets crossed the Atlantic, delivering the bounty of the New World directly into the heart of Spain. It was a blessing and a curse. The sudden influx of precious metals caused a period of runaway inflation across Europe, known as the Price Revolution. Goods became more expensive. Spanish industry at home declined. And with so much wealth at their disposal, the Spanish monarchy grew addicted to spending, especially on wars. Philip II, the powerful king under whom Spain reached its imperial zenith, declared state bankruptcy 4 times during his reign. Despite the illusion of invincibility, Spain's economic foundation was already beginning to rot. As the silver flowed, so did the settlers. But Spain did not send families. It sent conquistadors, soldiers, priests, bureaucrats. Most were unmarried men, often younger sons of noble families, seeking fortune in a land where birthright mattered less than ambition. Few women accompanied them, and so a new race emerged, the mestizos born of Spanish fathers and indigenous mothers. Spanish became the language of empire. Catholicism, the religion. Native cultures were often repressed or assimilated. Temples were toppled. Churches were built atop ruins. Entire populations were resettled, their labor extracted through systems like encomienda, a legalized form of serfdom. But as the generations passed, colonial society fractured into rigid castes. Peninsulares, Spaniards born in Europe who held the top administrative posts. Criollos or Creoles, Spaniards born in the Americas, often wealthy, but locked out of power. Mestizos, mixed race people, filling the middle ranks. Indigenous peoples, often at the bottom, taxed, forced to labor, and increasingly displaced. It was a hierarchy designed to maintain Spanish control, but one that planted the seeds of resentment. While America burned bright with wealth, Spain's imperial eye looked further still across the vast Pacific. In 1521, during the first circumnavigation of the globe, Ferdinand Magellan, sailing under the Spanish flag, landed on a group of islands in Southeast Asia. Though he was killed there, the islands would be named the Philippines in honor of Prince Philip, who would later become King Philip II. By the 1560s, the Spanish began colonizing the archipelago in earnest. Manila, founded in 1571, became a hub of global trade, linking the silver mines of the Americas with the markets of China and Japan via the Manila galleons. Once a year, silver from Acapulco crossed the Pacific to be traded for silk, spices, porcelain, and jade. It was the world's first truly global economic network, and Spain sat at its center. But far from the American heartlands, Spanish power in Asia was more fragile. Resistance was stiff in the southern islands of Mindanao, where Muslim sultanates refused conversion and fought bitterly against colonization. Still, the Philippines offered something Spain desperately needed: reach, prestige, and access to the East. By the early 17th century, Spain's empire was unmatched in size but overstretched and under pressure. In North America, Spanish explorers like Hernando de Soto had probed deep into what is now the American South from Florida to Texas. Others ventured into the Rio de la Plata, founding Buenos Aires in 1536. Yet these frontier regions remained thinly populated and loosely controlled. Meanwhile, European rivals had awakened. The Dutch, the French, the English, they saw opportunity in Spain's neglected northern claims. France staked its claims in Canada. The English established Jamestown in 1607, and over the course of the 17th century, pirates, privateers, and navies chipped away at Spanish dominance in the Caribbean. In 1655, England seized Jamaica. The Dutch captured Curaçao. Smugglers and slavers flooded the Spanish Main. Spain's monopoly, once guarded by canon and decree, now bled from 1,000 cuts. By the dawn of the 18th century, the Spanish Empire still stretched from California to Chile, from the Philippines to Puerto Rico. But beneath the grandeur, a slow rot had set in. The mines in Potosi and Zacatecas no longer produced silver in the volumes they once had. The easy conquests of the 16th century had given way to a sullen, overtaxed population. The wealth of the empire had fueled a golden age in art and architecture, but not in innovation. Spain had imported luxuries and culture, but failed to develop strong domestic industries of its own. Worse still, the burdens of empire fell increasingly on an exhausted crown. Endless wars in Europe against the Dutch, the English, the Ottomans, and later the French drained the royal treasury. Spain's vast fleet had become an aging relic, often bested by more agile rivals. Even as Spain still clung to massive colonial territories, it now relied on outdated systems of governance and protection. Internally, the colonies were no longer united in spirit. The criollos, European-descended Spaniards born in the New World, began to see themselves not as subjects, but as stewards of their own land. They resented the peninsulares, who were sent from Spain to rule over them, often arrogantly and without ties to local communities. In cities like Mexico City, Lima, and Bogotá, a colonial elite was beginning to imagine a future without Madrid. The Enlightenment ideas spreading through Europe, liberty, sovereignty, the rights of man began to find fertile ground in the New World. But change would not come from words alone. The spark came from across the Atlantic. In 1808, Europe was thrown into chaos when Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Spain and forced King Ferdinand VII to abdicate. In his place, Napoleon installed his own brother, Joseph Bonaparte, as king. To many in the Spanish colonies, this was the final straw. If the crown in Madrid could fall so easily, why should they continue to obey it? From Mexico to Argentina, revolutionary movements erupted. In Mexico, Father Miguel Hidalgo rang the church bell in 1810, calling for Grito de Dolores, a cry for independence that would spark a decade of conflict. In the Andes, Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín led liberation armies across thousands of miles of jungle and mountain. In Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Chile, and Peru battles raged, republics were declared, and royalist forces resisted to the end. By 1826, Spain had lost nearly all its colonies in the Americas. From the Rio Grande to Patagonia, the once mighty empire had unraveled. Only a few possessions remained: Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. These last outposts of empire became increasingly militarized, desperate symbols of faded glory. But history was not finished with Spain yet. In the late 19th century, the last sparks of Spanish colonialism began to fade. In Cuba, guerrilla warfare broke out in 1895, a struggle for independence that mirrored the older revolutions of the continent. Spanish forces responded with brutal suppression, but the tide of history had turned. Then, in 1898, the United States intervened. Following the mysterious explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, the U.S. declared war on Spain. The Spanish-American War was brief, barely 4 months, but decisive. Spain's outdated navy was annihilated in both the Caribbean and the Pacific. By the end of the year, Spain had been forced to cede Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States. With a stroke of a pen, 4 centuries of imperial dominance came crashing down. The empire built by conquistadors, missionaries, and kings, funded by oceans of silver, and held together by faith, fear, and force, was gone. Today, Spain is a nation of 195,000 square miles, its power no longer global, but its legacy impossible to ignore. The Spanish language is spoken by more than 500 million people across the world. Catholicism remains dominant across Latin America. Entire legal systems, architectural styles, and cultural identities bear the imprint of Spain's imperial age. But so too do the scars. The legacy of forced labor, the cultural destruction of indigenous peoples, the enduring inequalities left behind in colonial societies. The Spanish Empire was the first global superpower, a kingdom that once ruled from Manila to Mexico, from Lima to Louisiana. It rose on the shoulders of brave explorers and brutal conquerors. It wielded immense wealth, changed the course of global history, and sowed the seeds of both progress and oppression. Its story is not one of simple triumph or tragedy, but of transformation, and of a world forever changed by the ambitions of a small European kingdom that, for a time, ruled nearly half the globe.